Okay, folks, we're going to be heading into the first official Chapter 1 for the CSX Sand Patch Grade, the EMD GP38-2 Introduction. Surprisingly, I've recorded this a few times. I've actually failed it.
This is the latest generation general-purpose Type 38 locomotive built by the Electromotive Division of General Motors. Known as a GP38-2, it packs an efficient 16-cylinder diesel-electric motor able to generate 2,000 horsepower.
Okay, as it goes along, how I failed this was because I took myself out into camera view on the outside, and the game thought I left the engine, and it failed me. That's amazing. I don't even know how that's possible. Oh my goodness. So eventually you're going to tell me to walk up on this train, but before we do, there's a couple things you want to know. We got no cars.
First off, walk over to the locomotive as indicated.
So we got no rail cars and we got no other engine. So we got to treat this engine as a single engine for the sake of this. We also get a thing for walking on the tracks, so just kind of keep that in mind. Track safety is important, right? Let's walk up on this engine and go ahead and head in the doors.
Open the cab door and proceed inside.
By the way, if you were actually driving this thing and you were driving this for the first time, so to speak, you had no idea who used this before, it would actually help you to check and see the engine handbrake is turned on or off. Quite useful to do before you get going on your ride.
To take control, you'll want the engineer's seat. Head over and sit down.
So this tutorial here isn't going to let me click any buttons or open anything, not even the door. Now we're actually trapped inside, so we're actually forced into the engineer's seat.
Safety always comes first on the railroad. So to start with, we need to let those around us know this locomotive is operational. Begin by turning the forward headlights control to bright.
So something to keep in mind is we're on a giant switching yard here. So other than the two tracks at the very top, everything else in here basically isn't as important as it may seem. Maybe this purple line back there as well. But for the most part, a lot of this isn't as important as it seems. And so there's a few things that this game's mistakenly telling us already from the get-go. And normally we would just set this to dim, but they're actually asking us to put this to bright and not even telling us to bump the back one.
There are three key controls to operating this locomotive: the reverser, brakes, and throttle. The reverser determines direction of travel. Put this into forward.
So as we do this, the reverser you can pull in and you can get rid of and pull out. Just kind of keep this in mind. If you're driving a train, you want it in. If you're not driving the train, you don't want it in. So let's go ahead and move this forward.
To the left is the auto brake, which applies brakes along the entire length of the train. Let's move this to release.
So before we even touch that auto brake, let's remind you again. So our brake cylinder here, this 64 represents this handle right here, our independent brake. And the game's not really telling us that our handle is already on at the moment, but this is actually what we really should be using to stop the train, not so much this thing up here. But to look at the dial, this dial is already different than the train we just used. So the brake pipe that's down here is represented by this white line right here, already at 0.1 or 1 or whatever it is. Your equalizer, so to speak, is represented by this other line right here, this other white line. Your main reserve, the 140 here, is represented by this red line. And then your brake cylinder, the 64 that I mentioned just a minute ago, is this one right here, this other red line. Over here, this dial here is actually your dynamic brake system and your amperes for power. And so as we throttle up, this needle will start to go to the right, but if you use dynamic brake, it'll start to head back to the left. So there's just some things to know about the meters. And let us go ahead and do what they're asking us to do, which is essentially turn this guy off.
We're about to move, so make 2 blasts of the horn to alert anyone around. Remember, safety first.
So as it does it, look at what's happened to our brake cylinder. Our brake cylinder basically went empty. It all got shunted over here to the brake pipe. And now our brake pipe is set to 109. So this already tells me the cutout valve that's sitting right here is set wrong. It's set to the passenger cutout valve. And we're on a freight yard in a freight train using it for freight work, so to speak. So this cutout valve really should be set to 90, not 110. And the real question is the MU valve down here. What is this set to already? They don't even mention this at all about driving the train forward. It's almost like they introduce certain things to you, but leave out everything else. They want us to blow the horn. Before we even get to that horn, I want to pay attention to those switches down there. And we're going to go to the map for a second. And if you look at what's happening with the switches, this switch is not even lined up properly to here, and that switch is. So the game failed also to tell us to change the switch there, and you can tell this because the red symbol basically means the switch is curving, while the green symbol there basically means it's going to go straight down, okay? And if we had 3 tracks here, there'll actually be a third symbol, which is basically a combo red and green. So let's just go ahead and blow the horn.
Now add some power, but not too much. Too much power too soon can damage both the locomotive and the cars. Always start off nice and slowly. Increase the throttle lever by 1 notch.
So we're going to do that in just a second. So it's something about the horn. You don't really need it in a switching yard. Maybe the first time you drive the train out, but not necessarily. Most times the bell is all you need for the entire switching yard. So this entire giant area would need a bell at least up until like you get to the last switch out here, and then by then you can shut the bell off, right? So we're just gonna leave the bell on. We're gonna put this on notch 1, and you can see our amperes are already rising, and you can see the same corresponding indicator there. And that switch, as I said, I have not changed it, so we're actually going to see what happens when you go outside, and you'll see as the engine, actually 2 is the better, no, 3 is the better option to look at this, because we'll be right next to the engine. And I'm just going to kind of, actually 8's the better option to go with. Hopefully it doesn't cause me to fail it again. What's going to happen is it's going to automatically switch the switch if it was done right. There it goes. So the switch actually switched itself. This wouldn't actually happen. You would end up on the wrong track if this was actually accurate here. It's going to eventually start talking once I get to 10 miles an hour, but that shouldn't have happened. I should have switched this first before I get the train to move. So always pay attention to what your switches are before you get your train moving. So let's get back into the cab here, and it's about to hit 10 miles an hour, so he's going to start talking again. As we go along, there's a couple things here. This is your speedometer, same as this one, but it's actually off by like 0.1 or a couple of things.
You're moving. Great work. To maintain a constant speed, move the throttle back to its idle position.
So this bottom number here represents how fast you're moving in relative to the actual speed you're moving. So I'm actually moving at 17 feet, aka 17 miles per minute. And so we're going to go back to notch 1, and this dial should change to some other number.
That concludes the basic engineer training on this locomotive. So let's bring it to a stop. Move the auto brake to initial reduction. As with applying power, too much brake pressure applied too quickly can be detrimental to the train and its cargo.
So this number now says 0.6 because it's also representing how fast I'm going down the slope, as well as whatever leftover power I've got. Somehow it's got some leftover power too. And so we're going to go ahead and turn the brakes down, and we really should be using the independent brake because we're an engine, not with cars. So let's go ahead and put this on initial reduction. And bizarrely, it turned on the brake cylinder for some reason, but it also does some other weird things here that it shouldn't do. This, yeah, long story. But the train's done. We are stopped.
That was great work. You've just completed your first lesson operating the GP38-2. There's always more that can be discovered, though. As engineers, we'll never stop honing our skills.
And that's the end of this particular mission. So GP38-2 introduction, done. There's my medal. Yay, happy. So now there's something, by the way, odd, by the way. If you click right in versus continuing, the medal here won't show up, but it'll show up on the main screen. Just kind of a weird little thing that's going on here. But anyhow, hopefully you like this one. We will catch you hopefully in the next one. And as usual, like, subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Have a great one. Bye. So So it's always good to have a spotter, and what's kind of cool is I can be in the engine and switch the levers as it rolls along, which is really useful. But it's always good to have a spotter of some kind right here where the cars are, so you can kind of see what you're doing. And so I have two options. I can either use my independent brake, or I can use my other brake, which is my air brakes. I don't need air brake because I've no cars on it, so I'm going to turn on my independent brake, slow myself down a touch, and I'm aiming for just kind of gently bump up against these things. Do it again.